Sometimes it seems as if human rights were the only kinds of rights that we talk about today. They seem to frame the debate over every kind of issue of public policy, whether it be immigration, or environment, or voting, or socioeconomic inequality, you name it. Well, what would Hayek say? I'm Scott Nelson with the Austrian Economic Center and Hayek Institute in Vienna, Austria, and this week we're going to take a look at what Hayek would say about human rights. So, when discussing an issue like human rights, the very first thing that we should ask ourselves is what exactly is a right? Or what's the implication of a right? To say that you have a right to something, for example, means that you are guaranteed something. You have a claim on it. That also means, though, that you are able to require that somebody else furnish you with whatever it is that you've been guaranteed. So, we're speaking actually only of one side of the coin when we speak of rights. We should also speak of the other side of the coin, which is duties or responsibilities. So if I have a right to something, for example, a right not to be tortured or enslaved, as stated in Articles 4 and 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then everyone else has a duty not to torture or enslave me. You know, it's funny to see that nowadays so much of public discourse is focused exclusively on our rights as individuals and not on our duties. Nowhere today, for example, do you run into a text like that published or that one written in 44 BC by the great Roman orator Marcus Tullius Cicero on duties, which incidentally, next to the Bible, was the most widely published text of the Renaissance. And this is a bit of a shame, actually, that the focus has been so much on the one side of the coin, the right side of the coin, and not the duty side of the coin. Because if you think about it, rights they make you into a passive recipient. You are simply owed something by someone else or by some other group of people. Whereas duties are actually incredibly empowering. Duties give you agency as an individual. They actually give you power. So when talking about rights, duties is one of the things that we need to keep in mind. The second thing that we also need to keep in mind, though, is a person in an organization or an organization that can actually act. So, and this can differ depending on the circumstances. A child, for example, has the right to be fed and clothed and housed, etc., which means that the duty is imposed on the parents, the guardians, to ensure that to the child. But a right in the abstract cannot exist without particular circumstances stated which determine who is obliged to honor this right. And finally, the third thing that we should take into account in discussing rights is power or possibility. The right in question, is it even possible? Can we even secure it? So we cannot speak of rights that no one has the power to bring about. For example, we have no right that our house doesn't burn down. Now, human rights discourse is problematic in general for all of these aforementioned reasons. Take, for example, the case of torture happening to an individual on the other side of the world. If this person's human right not to be tortured is being violated, then who is it incumbent upon to right this particular wrong? Is it incumbent upon the particular state in which the individual finds himself? Well, what if the state simply refuses to listen? Then who has the duty of helping this person out and enforcing his human rights? Is it the duty of the state that I find myself in right now? But what if the state I find myself in right now has other priorities and doesn't care about human rights violations? Is then it incumbent upon me to defend this person's human rights? So these are some of the problems that one finds with human rights in general, regardless of their inherent desirability. Now, Hayek in particular had some problems with the human rights starting in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, starting with Article 22 and the next few, namely the ones that guarantee certain socioeconomic rights. For example, he asked, what exactly can be the legal meaning of the statement that everyone is entitled to the realization of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and free development of his personality? Or, for that matter, who exactly is supposed to enforce the claim or secure the claim to just and favorable conditions of work and just and favorable employment? And finally, what are the consequences of the requirement that everyone should have the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community and to share in the scientific advances and its benefits? Now, these are problematic for Hayek because they assume that society is essentially an organization and not what Hayek called a spontaneous order. If society is an organization, that means that it has an overriding purpose and a direction. Can we speak of society as having an overriding purpose and a direction? If we can't, should we begin speaking of society in those terms? Should we confer upon society an overriding purpose and direction? To do so, and to compel all of the members of society to conform to this direction, is essentially totalitarianism in the fullest sense of the word. Now, this is to say nothing about the inherent desirability of a world where every human being can freely develop his personality. And of course, a world that is without slavery or torture is undoubtedly a superior world. But a wish does not make it so, and labeling such wishes as rights may in fact be more harmful than helpful by introducing confusion into our very understanding of human rights. And I'd like on that note to actually conclude with just a quote from Hayek's very lucid presentation of this entire debate in his Law, Legislation, and Liberty. He says, "To see the most comprehensive authority which man has yet created undermining the respect it ought to command by giving countenance to the naive prejudice that we can create any state of affairs which we think to be desirable by simply decreeing that it ought to exist, and indulging in the self-deception that we can benefit from the spontaneous order of society and at the same time mold it to our own will, is more than merely tragic. To speak of rights, where what are in question are merely aspirations, which only a voluntary system can fulfill, not only misdirects attention from what are the effective determinants of the wealth which we wish for all, but also debases the word right, the strict meaning of which it's very important to preserve if we are to maintain a free society." And that's what Hayek would say.